was a quiet, cold, windy night in the cornfield I was in with my dog. My father told me to search through the somewhat small yet vast cornfield. My father was always scared of people that weren't us in his field. We both grew up hearing stories of our family members encountering unexplainable shit in forests, old buildings, and that very cornfield my father sent me to search. I remember how my father used to tell me experiences he had in that field, like seeing the stalks move on their own when the night was still and hearing sounds of animals like coyotes far or even close to him. Yet he's with me sharing the story. I always take my dog with me because he's able to sense something wrong from afar. There were some close calls several times in my life, all could have turned bad, but never had thanks to my dog. I quite literally owe my life to him. I then noticed the wind suddenly stopping. It was a still night once again. It was my time to search the field on a still night. I walked onto the dry dirt. My dog silently followed. I walked to the field. It looked so small yet through the stalks so vast. I paused inches before entering the field. My dog too, and he looked up at me wondering why we were still. This gave me reassurance as he did not know what I needed to know. I then entered the field in the near darkness of sunset. As soon as I started roaming around in the field, the sun was gone and moonlight began to shine throughout the place. My flashlight was very dim as it was pretty old. Still, my dog walked with me with no issue. I was getting pretty close to the tree line when a memory came up to me. Long ago, my mother warned me to not check a certain section of the cornfield. This part of the cornfield was on the far left side. It was a spot that led to the forest that was next to the field. I remember seeing it only once, and that one time was enough for me. There was a clearing with a small yet huge wooden house. It was abandoned for a very long time as my father remembered it always being abandoned. I remember seeing the building's roof through the corn and hearing its many creaking sounds. Something always felt wrong about that house. It just emitted a very bad feeling. Anyways, as I got closer to that side of the field, I noticed my dog looking around more and treading carefully. He does that whenever he knows the presence of small critters like rats who eat the corn. Really nothing to care about. For a moment, I felt sorta lost, despite me always walking a straight line when searching through the corn, which is normal considering I've been walking through corn for maybe half an hour already. Then the roof of that house popped out of the corn in the near darkness. That feeling of presence returns. I all of a sudden hear some type of whimpering from some type of animal. It was my dog. I almost forgot that he was here with me after staring at the roof for a second. Just something about that building just takes away my breath and makes me stare at it. Maybe that's my fear of it speaking to me. I take a look at my dog. He's doing nearly the same thing as me, but instead of mindlessly staring at it like how I did, he was staring at it with only one thing in his mind: fear. I immediately knew something was wrong, and that feeling of safety vanished. Before I could think, my dog began moving away from me, slowly getting faster like something was getting close. This was unusual as my dog always stayed by my side. I instantly knew this was my call to follow my dog. As soon as I began to follow him in a sort of speed walk, I heard wind between the corn, shaking the corn in the process. I had a feeling to check if it was really wind, so I put my arm up as high as I could towards the sky and above the corn while on the tips of my toes. The wind wasn't passing through my fingers. As the wind wasn't here today, I was not alone. I began running towards the direction of the end of the field. My dog started running when I wasn't looking, and yet he was too slow to keep up with me. The wind was blowing harder as the corn was shaking, tearing, and falling to the floor. I only imagined it was wind to keep myself calm so I wouldn't panic and ultimately not have enough air in me to keep running. It was blowing harder and harder until my dog wasn't fast enough and got engulfed by the wind. It went straight through him. The wind wasn't interested in him in the slightest. It was blowing towards me. I repeatedly amped my pace to outrun this thing. It did so too, like it knew exactly what move to mimic from me. I started to get tired and started to pant. It did so too with its somewhat deep yet high-pitched animalistic yet humanoid-ish sounding voice, if I could call it that. I started to see moonlight reflecting off the ground through the cornstalks. I was almost out. I'm almost there. I felt the great feeling of the stalks brushing against me as I exited out of the cornfield. I was not looking at the front of my house anymore. I was looking at nothing but forest. I looked to my left. There was my house from afar. I began running towards it, almost there. Almost there, as I heard the thing moving in stalks, going towards me until I heard the sound of my shoes on the porch. I then realized that in my fear I've already reached home. I opened the door, and as I was about to close it, my dog went inside the house as terrified as I was. Once I closed and locked the door, I fell down to the floor out of breath. I looked at my dog. He looked like he was tearing up and shaking violently out of fear. He had scratches on him from the stalks, but too from whatever that thing was in that field. The home was quiet and dark like the field. My parents were asleep since it was late. I stayed next to the door until I could catch my breath. My dog went to his bed, now sound asleep. I got up, and as I was heading back to my room, I felt the need to look at the window. So I did. I pulled the curtains back, put my head as close to the window as I can to see as much out there in the dark as I could and seen. I stood there frozen. It stood there frozen as well. We both didn't move for minutes. I noticed that it had its head tilted in what I think was curiosity. As we both looked at each other, I noticed that it had animal-like legs, and yet it still looked humanoid. This was no human nor any animal that I know of. That thing then turned its head facing to the field in an unnatural, robotic, yet animalistic motion, like it had noticed something in said field while tilting its head back to its normal position. It went back into the field unnaturally. I still stood there in complete shock at what I just witnessed. I then put the pieces together with what I encountered. I believe what I encountered that night was a skinwalker. No doubt about it. I never told my family members or anyone about this until now. 7 years have passed since that day. I was 14 when I saw that thing, and it has since been quiet around here. However, I have the feeling like it's been too quiet as of late. A thought that I've been dreading is now lingering in my head. I or someone else might be the unfortunate next one to encounter it. I have a feeling that the next time won't be so pleasant compared to what I experienced. The only thing I can really do at this point is to pray to God that the next time won't be the final time. I can only pray.